Hey everybody, welcome to Geeksvana. Thank you very much for joining me on what is a pretty impromptu show today with some breaking news to bring you from the FAA over in the United States. Now, this does affect the FAA remote ID. However, I want to stress very, very early on in this video that this is not a cancellation of remote ID as promised elsewhere. In fact, this news that has been announced just in the last few minutes from the FAA does not even affect all drones, but we're going to come on to all of that. But I wanted to stress that very, very early on so that people do not get the wrong impression in the chat and who are watching this video on the replay. Let me know in chat of the people who are starting to flood in. Thank you very much for being here, everyone. I really appreciate it. What you think as we go through this information and confirm what's actually happening. So it's also important to clarify that, in fact, the FAA do not have the power to cancel remote ID themselves. This is something which is already enacted. It would take some interaction, fairly heavy interaction there from Congress, probably even the wrong word. But a few days ago, they have promised some relief in terms of enforcement. So actually, if and how they're going to come after people in terms of remote ID. Now, that happened at one of the trade shows where they used the word relief for the first time in some of the press releases. And today's breaking news is good news in terms of those of you who need to fly with a module, but not for all drones. And I want to stress that. So there is more than one type of remote ID out there. There is, of course, standard and module. It's the very, very simple way of putting it. So you've either got the remote ID baked into your drone. So essentially you buy your DJI drone off the shelf, your Autel drone, etc., whatever that may be. If it's a manufactured drone, it already has remote ID in there. It's already going to transmit that information. That is still going to happen. That is still required, basically. So that's a very important differential to make here. Also, technically, if you have a module already, if you've bought one, you fitted it to your aircraft, then technically you would need to be transmitting it as well. So it's all about if you're able to do so or not. So, you know, if you fitted a module to your aircraft, does that suddenly break or need to be unfitted? That's completely up to you. So it is, again, only those drones and aircraft that actually need the module. So we're going to go across to the FAA's Twitter account here and just have a very quick look at the breaking news. So the headline that they've put there is the remote ID identification requirement for drones has been extended to March 16th, 2024. So not a huge one. Anybody who watches Greg over at Pilot Institute, he put together some absolutely fantastic journalism, frankly. I really do have to give him a shout out for, in terms of the fact they put together very, very quickly a questionnaire regarding modules, etc. Now, this, I believe, is nowhere near the date that they were saying that they would actually catch up on. I can't quite remember in terms of manufacturing remote ID modules. But again, at least they put that information across the FAA. At least the FAA had that information, and that's information that, of course, a lot of you would have completed, a lot of you would have filled out through Greg's excellent questionnaire there. So again, well done, Greg, for that. I'm sure that had some kind of impact here. So we're looking on the actual press release from the FAA. As I said, we've just received this a few minutes ago. So the FAA extends remote ID enforcement date 6 months. Drone pilots, and remember the wording here, we will go through this again in a couple of minutes, but just bear with me with the wording here. Drone pilots who are unable to comply with the broadcast requirement of the remote ID rule will now have until March 16th, 2024 to equip their aircraft. After that date, operators could face fines and suspension or revocation of pilot certificates. In making this decision, the FAA recognizes the unanticipated issues that some operators are experiencing finding some remote identification broadcast modules. Drone pilots can meet this deadline by purchasing a standard remote ID equipped drone from a manufacturer or purchasing a module which can be affixed to existing drones that do not have remote ID equipment. Remote ID acts like a digital license plate. There's that saying that we all love in the drone community and industry so much, and will help the FAA, law enforcement, and other federal agencies find the control station when a drone appears to be flying in an unsafe manner or where it is not allowed to fly. And the link there takes you across to the getting started on remote ID pages. So again, we need to really drill down here and focus on the fact that this is not a cancellation. You do not now have another 6 months to comply with remote ID unless you require a module. If you don't decide not to, then they're not going to move this date around. So if there's suddenly thousands of modules available on the market in a month's time, they're not suddenly going to say, we're now bringing this forward. This will now become the new date for people that require modules. If you're a DJI camera drone flight, which I know a lot of my community, a lot of my viewers are in particular, this does not affect you. You are still going to need to comply with remote ID from this Saturday. Now, we did have another video which was scheduled for release at 8 p.m. this evening. I might just slip that one out anyway. Certainly, I'll release it by tomorrow. And in that video, probably need to redo the beginning of it because we're actually saying we don't know what the FAA announcement will be in the next couple of days. So I may have to do a bit of re-editing with producer Will there, but that particular video is an interview with Kevin Morris where they talk about when they're going to enforce it, how they're going to enforce it, whether or not it includes local law enforcement, that type of thing, federal agencies, and how that actually happens. Because I know that's a big question in the community in terms of actually how the FAA are going to enforce it when it does come into action. So again, just run through this again very quickly. The drone pilots who are unable to comply with broadcast remote requirement of the remote ID rule will now have until March 16th, 2024 to equip their aircraft. After that date, operators could face fines and suspension or revocation of pilot certificates. So if you are flying a drone which has the, as we call it, the built-in remote ID, then nothing changes for you essentially. You will still need to 100% comply rather, with this, as I just bring that chat in there whilst we're chatting. Okay, so let's have a very quick look in the chat. Any questions people have on this? Yes, Trevor Fuss had spotted that the time for the video had shifted by 2 hours. As I was explaining to you, Trevor, that's actually because that was a different video, as I've just explained. Fly Tuck, how do I know if I got the batteries in right? Tap, tap, tap. Is this thing on? Yeah, no, indeed. I was rattling around to be able to come on live. We were actually recording for a client this afternoon, so I had very different branding on there as well. Hi, Dave from Fly High. Good to see you. Fly High FPV. I bought a bunch of ESP chips, $5 each, can make hundreds of rids at the same time. Yet they want us to buy $200 bricks to strap on. And I think that's where, for me, Dave, one of the biggest issues in terms of the technology, where my disappointment's been, from the point of view that this could have been, if they wanted remote ID, they could have achieved this in many different ways. The fact that you're able to spoof fake remote ID means that, do you really have to? Is it really that vital that you use a module which is 100% to some form of standard, etc., or is it just important that the information gets out there? The information can be cross-checked at a later stage anyway, or faked anyway. So yeah, it is disappointing. I have seen some of them go for a lower amount than that now. I think the cheapest I've seen is something around the $80-90 route, but I know that there are some that are coming, which apparently will cost less than that, but we'll have to wait to see. Mark Big Bear, thank you so much for your $5 super chat. I really appreciate your ongoing support. And yes, as John Coopy saying, delayed, not cancelled. And indeed, again, I don't want to sound like a stuck record and an old man, the old news guy, but this is a delay for modular remote ID only. If you've got the baked in remote ID, you will still need absolutely to comply come this Saturday. So no going and hacking or using any of the software that removes remote ID from your manufactured drone, because that will get you in some trouble. You won't be able to say, I wasn't able to comply, because absolutely the drone will be on the list of approved devices. So there we have it. That is the breaking news. Remote ID delayed. Bring up the news one more time there from the FAA. Delayed until March the 16th, 2024 to allow enough time for you to equip your aircraft with a module. After that date, operators could face fines and suspension of pilot certificates. Now, interestingly, in the video we were going to play out this evening regarding the FAA enforcement, there is already a stepped program planned in place in terms of how they educate and then move towards prosecution or fining. so in actual fact, there is already a stepped process there as well. That video we will probably put out tomorrow if I've had a chance to re-edit the beginning. But yes, but again, this is for the module side of remote ID rather than the full remote ID cancellation or anything else of that nature, basically. So there we have it. That's the news, the breaking news from Geeksvana. Thank you very much for joining us. This is a little bit earlier than I expected to go on today, and we'll see you again tomorrow live for another show. This time, hopefully a planned one. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.